No, it's not September already, but in fact it is Lady Vols season, and that means that, well, some people think that that nickname should go away, and some people think that that nickname should be expanded once again throughout all of Tennessee's teams. As I mentioned before on Tri-City Sports Now, earlier last week, around the time Nike took over from Adidas to clothe the Tennessee teams, the the University of Tennessee dropped the Lady Vols name except for the basketball team, and so now the swimming or the softball teams are known strictly, if women play them, by the Volunteers, same as the men. This has kind of been a trend over the last 25 years or so in college athletics to be a little bit more politically correct. Ideas that perhaps calling the name the Lady Vols is sexist. That's an argument, if you will. Well, one person that doesn't think that is Susan Whitlow. She's a Bristol native, and because of that, she has accomplished a feat that I think is incredible. She's collected 28,000 physical signatures, is what she's telling me, on a petition to try to restore the name Lady Vols to all of the Tennessee women's teams. Susan Whitlow up there in Bristol, thanks for joining us here, the Bristol, Tennessee side, obviously. But Susan, I want to thank you for joining us, but that is an incredible amount of signatures you've collected. Where does the passion to restore the Lady Vols nickname come from?
I think that for me, there are several things. One of them is Pat Summitt, of course, and she's who came up with the name Lady Vols back in, I think, 76. They were talking about what to call the women's teams, and Volettes came up, and it was like nobody wanted that. So I think she's the one who said, what about Lady Vols? And everyone around her said, that's perfect. So that's a real simple history of it. And I became a fan because of Pat Summitt, really, probably the year that she coached the Olympics. I became a Lady Vols basketball fan. And I lived in Northern Virginia at the time and couldn't really follow the team. But my sister used to, who lived in Knoxville then, used to videotape any televised games, and that was rare then. And she taped from the radio the games and would send me these tapes so I could keep up with the basketball team. So I'm a longtime basketball, Lady Vols basketball fan.
I love those stories. I used to be, myself, Susan, having lived all over, but yeah, I used to try to get friends in Western Pennsylvania, for instance, to tape Steelers games for me and send them down to me here before, the advent of the internet where you could watch whatever game you wanted to basically from anywhere. And my knuckleheaded friends wouldn't often do that, but nevertheless, now I can catch up on YouTube here 20 years later, that sort of thing. But that's a tremendous story. Tell us how the petition drive came about, though, and just to remind people here, 2015, Nike took over for the to clothe the athletic teams. They had been with Adidas for a long time, had Tennessee, and with that came the demise of the Lady Vol nicknames for the softball team and the other women's teams, except for the basketball team, which I never got. It's either sexist one way or it's sexist not, so how can it be sexist for the other teams but not for the women's basketball team? Makes no sense whatsoever. Anyway, how did the petition come about here, Susan Whitlow?
Well, Dave Hart made the announcement in November of 2014 that they were taking away the name Lady Vols for all of the teams except basketball. And along with that announcement, he said, and this is a direct quote, "There will be no discussion." That really rubbed me the wrong way. For one thing, back in, I believe it was April, and all this is recorded in different places, back in April, he had been asked about this and said at that time that was not even under discussion. It was not going to happen. No one needed to worry. And so, those of us who had heard that maybe this was in the books were told, nope, not going to happen. So not only I felt betrayed, honestly, and I'm a child of the '60s, and I also have a strong sense of right and wrong and the rights of the population, and especially the population who's being affected by something. So I bitched and moaned. Oops, pardon the language.
No, that's fine. This is a sports talk show, okay, Susan?
Okay. So anyway, I did. I bitched and moaned at home for a couple of days, and was rolling around in my head, what in the world can I do about this? And my first idea was a petition. So I wrote the petition, and at some point on the show, I'd like to read it so people know what the petition says.
Please do right now if you'd like.
I wrote the petition and started it, and also contacted once Nike was on board. But this announcement was before Nike. Nike was on board, and I talked to them. I can't remember who else I talked to, but several of us were asking questions about why. And Dave Hart, both on radio and TV, was trying to tell why, and he honestly still has never given a reason. And just so people know, sexism has never been mentioned by the University of Tennessee as a reason for doing this.
That's very interesting because
isn't that?
Yeah, and
so it was not about that, and he finally settled on we want it to be one Tennessee, which is a good concept except for two things. One, it was already one Tennessee with Vols and Lady Vols, no problem. And then the other thing is, if it's going to be one Tennessee, then what about basketball?
Exactly.
Basketball.
And
so the things that he said just never, ever gave a reason or even made sense.
It sounds a lot like, an athletic director who probably did go to Nike. Now, Nike has been a politically correct company, or trying to be, for a long time. And, it can drive you up the wall sometimes. Here's Sweatshop City, but, we'll try to do the right thing politically or so. And this may be part of that effort. You mentioned that it did, the change came a little bit before the change to Nike, but you got to feel that there were negotiations and stuff. And Nike has been, I think, a big player in taking away those nicknames like the Lady Vols or the Lady Cats for Kentucky, let's say, and all this. I also noted before you came on here, Susan, that Penn State, which is clothed by Nike, their women's teams are known as the Nittany Lions, except, of course, women's basketball, they're the Lady Lions. And you got to think, well, maybe this is actually a way to sell more merchandise because you can brand your women's basketball program, if it's successful, as it is at Tennessee and as it is at Penn State, as something unique. And so hence that's something. Now, have you talked to Nike at all?
I contacted Nike on the phone originally, and then I sent them, and they were flabbergasted that anybody even cared. But then when I sent the first 5,000 signatures in, I sent a copy of the cover letter to the CEO and the president of Nike, and I heard from them immediately. And I would also like to say this. I heard from Nike immediately. I have heard nothing from the University of Tennessee except two form letters in which they inserted and the petitions as a response to something else I had sent them. So UT has not responded in any way. We have invited them to press conferences. We've really tried to. We've been to visit them in their offices, but I mean they haven't even written me a letter to say we got the petitions. We got the signatures. But anyway, Nike did respond immediately and denied anything to do with it. My personal opinion is that Nike, of course, had something to do with it. They've done the same thing in Georgia, and Georgia fans were just livid and have flocked to sign this petition when I've been at the SEC tournament. And I think it has. I think it has nothing to do with sexism from Nike.
Tri-City Sports Now is back. I'm Marky Bilson. I'm talking to a lady named Susan Whitlow, who is a Bristol native, who is trying to restore the nickname Lady Vols to all the teams at Tennessee. You know that at one time that was the case, but in 2015 or so, the decision was made by Dave Hart and allegedly also Nike, who was now clothing Tennessee after a long tenure with Adidas, that, let's go with the trend and make nicknames gender neutral. You'll all be the Volunteers, except for some reason, the women's basketball team. Now, a lot of times at other universities, I was talking off the air to Susan, and a little background, when Delaware, for instance, went away from being the Lady Blue Hens, which, yes, does sound redundant, but nevertheless, to being just the Blue Hens all over, the supporters of that decision said that it was sexist to call a team the Lady Blue Hens or the Lady Vols. But talking off the air, that's something you don't agree with, is it, Susan?
I disagree with it for the Lady Vols. I don't necessarily disagree with it for other teams. I think it's up to each individual group of women playing for those teams. Honestly, it's not up to me. And something that I do know is that the women athletes at the University of Tennessee want to be known as Lady Vols. They reinforce that with me every time I am around any of them, and they thank me for carrying on with this petition. So that's where I am with that.
So you don't wish to comment on the 25-year-old decision of Mercer to go away from the Bears to the Teddy Bears to the Bears?
That to me is an outside issue. I'm focused on the Lady Vols.
All right.
And there is a huge difference between any other women's teams in the world and the Lady Vols in the name. The Lady Vols are renowned around the world. That brand is a brand that stands for integrity and honor and sportsmanship and you name it, in all positives. There's never been a negative association with the name Lady Vols, and the name is known around the world because of Pat Summitt.
All right.
So for a school to get rid of a name and logo that carries the weight and significance of Lady Vols is baffling.
Well, the one thing, though, is that it hasn't totally been done away with, Susan. Obviously, for the reasons you mentioned, perhaps the name is still on the basketball program, but why isn't that enough for you?
Because the women athletes want this name themselves.
Okay.
And the fans do. And they still call themselves Lady Vols. The fans still call them Lady Vols. The team members still call themselves Lady Vols. The only people who don't are the press because they really have been told not to, because that's not the official name. But, yeah, the girls want their name back. It was their identity. And the whole thing was done without consulting them. And there you can check online. There's a site online where a lot of the women athletes talk about what the name means to them.
What is that site?
Do you remember the name of it? Oh, shoot.
What would we Google? Would there be a person, if we were trying to find it, how would we Google that site? I can try to do that right now. What would be a search engine name?
I would Google Bring Back Lady Vols and see what comes up. I'm sorry I don't remember the name of the site. I haven't been to it in so long.
Don't worry. But you have...
But it's testimonials by athletes, both male and female, from the University of Tennessee about restoring the name Lady Vols for all the women's teams.
It is, in fact, bringbacktheladyvols.com. And, for instance, this is a collection of letters. And, for instance, they have a volleyball player who has this, and 55 people adding their own comments. Let's see here. In fact, Leslie Sakira is the person that is putting this effort together, this website, and she is a former volleyball player who would like the nickname restored to her team. Okay, and in fact, Bring Back the Lady Vols on Facebook has, as I'm looking at this, 1,938 likes. 1938, Yankees win the series, okay. But your petition, and it's a physical petition, has 28,000 signatures generated over, 3 years or so. That's more than a political candidate would get to get on the ballot, for crying out loud. So Susan Whitlow, tell us a little bit. You wanted to say what the petition said initially. Could you tell us this now?
I want to read the petition.
Sure.
This is what people are signing. We, the undersigned, believe the name Lady Vols with its accompanying logo should be restored to all women's sports teams at the University of Tennessee. We believe the name is not sexist, that it has become a powerful, internationally recognized name synonymous with integrity, pride, and excellence, that it in no way diminishes the idea of One Tennessee, and that it has been and always will be an honor for University of Tennessee women's athletes to call themselves Lady Vols. And so far, I have mailed in 28,502 signatures. This is, again, hard copy, real people I've talked to. I've got another, believe it or not, 1,500 waiting to go in. I just made copies today. I keep copies of all of them. I believe the school does not. So I'm actually up to 30,000.
30,000 signatures now.
Yeah.
Now, what if somebody wanted to sign this petition? How would they contact you to sign it?
Well, you can get a copy of it at the on the Facebook page, Bring Back the Lady Vols. However, that gives you a copy of the petition with a place for 20 people to sign it. So the good thing about that is if you'll download it, get 20 people to sign it. My information is at the bottom of it. My name and address are out there. So you can just get it signed and mail it to me, and I would love to get it. The other thing is, when I went today to have copies made of my my most recent 50 pages, and I get the copies made at Minuteman Press. This is in Bristol on the Volunteer Parkway. And so they have a copy there that if people are driving by or just want to make a trip over to Minuteman Press, you can sign the petition there. The address is 1135 Volunteer Parkway, and it's in that, this is small town directions, it's in that little shopping center that's right down from Big Lots and across from that building that has the silo. So how's that for small town directions?
Susan, I think Susan, you'd be surprised how many people give directions like that in Manhattan. Trust me. and when I lived in, see, the difference between, I will tell you, giving directions here and also in another place I live, which is Pittsburgh, is that at Pittsburgh the landmarks that they want to give you aren't there anymore. Okay,
that happens here, or it's where something used to be.
Yes. You have this circumstance where I could recall one time a person. Now you got to pass Isley's. This was where they used to make the Isley's ice cream, where they used to actually make Klondike bar and all the. I happen to know where it was. And Ben made Klondike bars there in 20 years, but it's where the Klondikes. I actually tried doing that once in Johnson City. Oh yeah. You know where the George Washington Federal is? And a tow truck driver told me, no, I don't know where that used to be. What you're giving me is a direction from an establishment that closed up before I was born. So, yeah, so it can only work some way, and all this. But no, Minuteman Press down on Volunteer Parkway. You can sign the petition or go to Facebook, Bring Back the Lady Vols, and just mail it in to Susan Whitlow. Now, the contract with Nike to clothe the Tennessee Volunteers teams lasts until 2023. I actually think that one of the reasons why Tennessee did go to Nike is I remember hearing articles, and there were actually recruits that would, and this just blows my mind. I can't believe people would actually do this, but say, I don't know if I want to go to Nike because they're an Adidas school, and the sneaker companies had actually gotten to the recruits, even in high school, and were trying to, push their way to a college or something because of potentially what they were already giving them in terms of sneakers and apparel and so on and so forth. The sneaker companies actually branded high school athletes. It was beyond me, and I found it shocking and not in a positive way, but nevertheless, that's what happened. Do you think that in 2023 that Tennessee will continue on with Nike?
I personally hope not. I mean, I have a lot of reasons that I don't like Nike, so I hope not. And one reason for me, this is actually the truth. The women's basketball teams were just beautiful when they had Adidas. They were so pretty, and now every single uniform that from a Nike school, they believe the word uniform. Uniform. Every school, every team has the exact same uniform. It's just unbelievable.
And that could come by trying to brand, and obviously, I mean, different colors and such. But yeah, when the outfitter to try to make, yeah,
it's the same cheap neckline. I mean, they are all the same. You just look at a team, and this whole push with making every single team have one letter. You know, you see a big K. Which team is that?
Yeah, is it Kentucky? Is it Kent State? You know, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I get, yeah,
but,
yeah.
And I mean, Nike is behind all that, and I don't think I'll live long enough to see the change where schools start going back to their real names.
In other words, the real name being Lady Vols, and are you also making
or
a state?
Just UT.
Okay.
Instead of T.
No, I know the old UT
Tennessee
logo.
State
Yeah.
Now with that E, can you imagine? Instead of ETSU, it's just an E. That's meaningless.
Interesting.
Oh my gosh! And that's straight from Nike. I just think they don't have enough designers who think.
Susan, I do have to tell you.
Idea, and they are going with it.
Susan, I do have to tell you that I do like the new E logo with the Tennessee in the middle of ETSU. I go back, I remember the somewhat script ETSU logo of the 80s or so, which was sort of a logo of the time. I got to tell you, I did like the E logo. It's tough to give a logo to ETSU. But no, it's a very interesting point that you make, the old UT logo. There are some that might say, well, how do you know it's not Texas then? But it's an interesting thought of what you're bringing up. Nevertheless, I do like what you're trying to do with the Lady Vols. I wish you a lot of success. Definitely be trying to sign the petition here, either on Facebook.com, Bring Back the Lady Vols, or head down to Minuteman Press on the Volunteer Parkway in Bristol. Susan, thanks for joining us. I do appreciate what you're doing. I tend to think that the change of nicknames of what's going on is unnecessary and counterproductive even. So I wish you a lot of success.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Like I said, I like the idea of that E with the state in it. I just think they could have done better than come up with an E for that school.
I like the fact that you, such a passionate Tennessee fan, are giving ETSU some props. Because Tri-City Sports Now does.
I live in the Tri-Cities, and by the way, East Tennessee State is my alma mater.